Good morning again. Okay, in case you're really confused because this is your first Sunday, we're in the middle of a sermon series called Jesus Applies to College, and let me explain really quickly. Everybody else just bear with us for a second. So a few years ago, an organization called the Common Application put out, actually it's been around since the 1970s, but it became really in vogue over the past few years for almost all of America's colleges and universities to use one single application when high school seniors are applying to college for the next fall. And that meant that there was uniformity in all of the essay questions that were asked each year. So every spring in April, the new set of 6 or so questions comes out for the next fall's applicants. And oftentimes what will happen is if you're applying to one of those colleges, you will get to pick from one or two of those essays that you will respond to on your college applications. Having a high school senior myself this year, this didn't come out of nowhere. I was reading over some of these essay questions and I thought, well, those are pretty solid questions. And not just for 17-year-olds, but for life. I mean, and how interesting would it be, and at a small group conversation this morning, it came up at our table, how would I have answered this question very differently at that point in my life than I would now in adulthood? And so I thought it'd be fun to put together a sermon series asking, just hypothetically, well, if Jesus were going to respond to each one of these essays, how would he respond? So we're going to take a look at today's question. This is the second to the last one that we'll be doing in this series. This is essay number 4, and here's the question. Discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and of new understanding in yourself or others. Discussion, accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. I was really drawn to this question about a realization that sparked a period of personal growth. And I was thinking about those, and thinking about those even in my own life. Well, I'm just going to be honest with you. There are many things that I could come up with, many essays I could write, and very few that I'd think, you know what, I want to share that. I want to share that with the church. Let me think about some ways that I screwed up royally, and I'm just going to volunteer that to the congregation that I serve. So I'm going to keep those to myself, and maybe you'll be treated to that in a small group, a very, very small group experience someday. But it is easier to do this question when you're thinking about, well, how would somebody else, I would answer that for my spouse really well. Or I could write that essay for my own children better than they could do it themselves. But also thinking about where this came in mind for Jesus. And so I was thinking about this, and it really didn't take me too long to think of a story that I think many of us think of as confusing, a bit odd, certainly what feels out of character for Jesus, and just flat out troubling in some respects. So, if you weren't paying close attention a few moments ago, reading from the 7th chapter of Mark. Jesus has just been in sort of some of the early stages of his public ministry. The feeding of the 5,000 has happened. It doesn't really matter where the gospel account of the feeding of the multitude, or the feeding of the 5,000, or the feeding of the 4,000, where it happens, it typically ends up being that wherever that story is told, Jesus seems to want to find a little bit of quiet space after that. It's almost like sometimes in the gospel stories, the more large scale the miracle that Jesus performs, the more it sort of takes a toll on him physically or spiritually. It's sort of an interesting thing. It's like he wants to just withdraw for a little bit. Not because he's over people or he's necessarily an introvert, although I think he might have been a little bit. But I think that what happens is he just needs a time to sort of recharge his batteries. But this happens in Mark's gospel at such a time and a place that he is reaching sort of peak recognition. And so he really can't go many places without being recognized for who he is and what he has been doing. And people they're attracted to this, right? They want to hear what he has to say. If they are in need of a cure or of a miracle, they are bringing themselves or their loved ones to him. And look, he's creating a buzz wherever he goes, and people just want to witness that. And so this story says something that would have been fairly obvious to people in Jesus' time, but maybe a little bit less obvious to us. And it says that he goes to the region of Tyre. Now, Tyre is over on the Mediterranean coast. It's a port town. It's a place where later on some of the apostles will end up using as a launching off point to go out to sea and catch a ship to go to places west. And so Jesus goes to this area. Sometimes it's referred to as the region of Tyre and Sidon as we read about it in Scripture. And so it spans just west of the region of Galilee, which is where Jesus' home base is, and it goes all the way over to the Mediterranean coastline. And Jesus goes there for this period of recharging. He just needs a few days or a week or two distancing himself from the crowds and the attention and the miracle performing. And he goes there because he thinks, I will be able to escape notice there. And that's because this is a region that is highly populated with Gentile people. It's a non-Jewish part of the region. And there are a few Jews that live there, but most of them are living in very small pockets within larger communities. They are living, for the most part, in poverty. And the other thing that's known about this region of Tyre and Sidon is that the non-Jews, the Gentile people who live there, are fairly well off. Like they are doing well in life in this area. And the reputation about them is that they are unfair to the Jewish minority population that lives within their communities. So Jesus goes up there because he thinks, I'm less likely to run into anybody that's heard of what I'm doing. I'll be able to sort of slip under the radar there, and I can go just have a little quiet, little time of reflection. And Jesus, is not going to the beach. He is in prayer. He is studying Scripture. He is finding solitude and recreation in those moments. So he slips away, and he goes to this house where he feels like he will not be detected by anybody, and it doesn't take more than a split second before he's recognized. And as the story tells us, there is a woman, Syro-Phoenician in origin, and Syria and Phoenicia are ancient names for this part of the world. So in other words, Mark is telling us she's a local woman, aka she's a Gentile, she's a non-Jew, and she has heard about Jesus, and he has walked into this house, and already he's ambushed with somebody who has a need. His daughter has an unclean spirit, which we find out later in this passage means that she is possessed by a demon. And so this woman has heard enough about Jesus where she believes that he has the ability to do something about her daughter's condition. And so she says, my daughter has an unclean spirit. Will you help me? And here is where Jesus says, debatably, the most troubling and un-Jesus-like thing he says in all of the Gospels. He says, who are you that would ask this of me? Is it right that I should take the children's food and throw it to the dogs? Now, let's talk about what he just said, what he means by that. Okay, who is it that you would ask this of me? First of all, it's another instance where, first of all, you are not a Jew. And you are a woman, And you are addressing me, a man, in public, and challenging me and asking me to do something for you. And our people don't talk to each other. We don't like each other. And the reputation is that my kind of people are mistreated by your kind of people in this community. And you are wealthy and from a place of status and position of power, and my people here are suffering under your oppression. And how dare you, with all of the economic and the social and the religious loaded stuff that enters into this equation, how dare you come to me and ask me of a darn thing? You shouldn't be making eye contact with me, much asking me for a favor. And is it right that I should take the children's food, aka the children of Israel, aka the Jewish people? Is it right that I take what should be offered to the Jews and extend it to the dogs, to you? So let's just be clear. Jesus calls this woman and her sick daughter dogs. That's what I mean about, a lot of us would say, can we just remove that verse or that passage or that kind of ugly thing that Jesus says, and can we remove it from this? And honestly, it'd probably make us a lot more comfortable if he did. And there's been some scholars who have tried to explain away this, dog didn't have the same connotations back then. Nonsense. Throughout human history, I contend that if you call somebody a dog, it's not a great thing, okay? Unless you're my dog. That's different. That's a contextual thing. He is not saying something kind. It's just, we're not beating around the bush here. That's just the way it is. And so he says, I am here. My mission is to the children of Israel, the Jewish people. That is my mission. That is my mission field. That is whom I am sent to. They are the chosen people. God has set them aside in a particular place and time to do God's work. And now I am doing the fruition of this work and this grand scale vision. And I am here to offer the children their food. And is it right that I would take some and throw it to the dogs? And she comes right back and says, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that the children drop from the table. The woman who had no business culturally saying anything to Jesus now has a retort. She rebuts his snarky remark, his ugly remark. And it's one of those moments that Jesus stops dead in his tracks. Consider a time, a relationship, or a circumstance that changed your perspective. I mean, this is the essay question for this moment. Right? This is the moment that Jesus goes, you know, I think you're right. First of all, there's an incredible leadership lesson in here, which is to, run in stark opposition to this allergy that we have of being wrong or ever admitting that we're wrong, right? This is a thing that has become, culturally for us, a sign of weakness to ever admit that you made a mistake or in light of new evidence or a better argument to change your position, right? And that is infuriating, first of all, to all of us, but we all do it, right? How many times do we stubbornly stand our ground even when we know we're wrong, even when the evidence is against us and we just refuse to acknowledge it? So here Jesus is setting a good example for all of us. And he says, okay, for that you may go. And your daughter's been healed. In other kind of similar circumstances in the Gospels, what Jesus says, your faith has made you well. Right? It's one of those kinds of stories. It's not the same, but it's one of those stories where somebody did something in such desperation or challenged Jesus or broke some sort of social norm or taboo, like touching the hem of his garment or reaching out to him or saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, and falling to the ground and falling on your face. Like those are things that were so uncharacteristic in some ways that Jesus said, no, wait. Everybody else thinks that you're doing something wrong or taboo or making a fool of yourself, but what you are showing me is that you have such faith that you have faith that the rest of this crowd who is just looky-loos and kind of curious about what's going on, you have this great fascination with me, but here is somebody who you are calling out for being inappropriate, and they are the one who's actually demonstrating a great deal of faith. And so this woman has the audacity to bring her daughter to Jesus, and he says, because you have done this, and because you have challenged me, and because you have said, yeah, right, why would God's grace be limited to a select sliver of humanity when it could be extended to everyone? Yes, the crumbs are for you and your daughter too. And for that, she has been made well. I think that not only does Jesus sort of do a 180 in this moment, and not only does he talk to this woman differently, and not only is the daughter cured, but he has a change in how he goes about his ministry after this point. Because the next story, the one immediately following this, he goes into a region north and east of there called the Decapolis. And the Decapolis is 10 different cities, the Deca. There's 10 different cities that are all kind of clustered together, and they are all Gentile stronghold cities again. And so Jesus' next step is not to go back into the heart of Jewish culture, but because he had this turning point moment now, he goes into the Decapolis, which is now Gentileville. And he takes his message there. It's a turning point. The scope has now expanded. The circle is now bigger. And this is where Jesus focuses his attention next. I get uncomfortable with this story because the Jesus that I have in my mind doesn't call anybody a dog in an unkind way. And you probably feel that way too, I'm guessing. But if theologically we have this right, where Jesus is one person with two natures, and Jesus is fully divine and fully human simultaneously, then what we have in this story is the fully human on full display. And so you must take the fully human with the fully divine, but the fully human also means that we learn from our mistakes, or that we have a change in perspective, or that when we encounter a relationship that causes a shift in our lives, that it can have massive impact on us. And I would guess that for most of us, if we were thinking about the relationship or the realization or the aha moment that caused a turning point in our lives, in some cases it's going to be because we were presented with evidence, and in some cases it was going to be because we read a book that changed our lives, and in some cases it was going to be a quote or a factoid or a stat sheet that you saw somewhere, but almost always it's going to be a relationship. It's going to be somebody that you entered into a shared life experience with. A new friend, a coworker, somebody with a different perspective, somebody from a different side of town, somebody from a different side of the world. And because of that, that was the catalyst for some sort of change for you. There's a Christian writer that I like who talked about asking 3 questions as preachers are preparing to write a sermon. The first question is, what is the existential urgency in this particular passage of Scripture? The second is, why was this passage saved? In other words, why was this particular story or this lesson, this verse of the Bible, why did this one get saved and set aside? And then the third question is, what relevance does this have, or what relevance has this demonstrated in speaking to the human condition or the human story? He says, when we can answer those questions, that's what we use to form the basis of a good sermon. And so I was thinking about those questions. I was thinking about, well, why did this particular story survive? Because it would have been a lot easier if you're Mark and you're telling this story to leave out the part where Jesus calls a woman a dog. You could have left that out. So why did this one make the cut? Why has this survived the passage of time? Why is this one still with us? And I think there's two things. We've talked about them both already. The first is that I think it shows us a moment of exhaustion, of frustration, of Jesus being a product of his time and place, even though we'd like to think he rose above that. But it also talks about Jesus, the very human side of Jesus, and having a change in perspective. And how could we call God fully human in Jesus if we're not prepared to see some of the challenges that Jesus faces? And he doesn't ace everything right the first time. But in this case, he has a learning, and that learning then is a way that we learn about ourselves and about how we treat our neighbors. And the other part is that I think that this moment is the turning point for which a lot of other stories that follow in the New Testament will take their lead from. I'm not sure if the story that Amanda shared with the kids about Peter having the vision of this great sheet coming down from the heavens with all of the animals on it and him going out and talking to and baptizing Cornelius, I'm not sure that that happens if Jesus didn't have this moment where he had that pivot as well. I think the story plays differently in ancient Judaism if Jesus says, hey, I have a message for you. The Gentiles should now be included. Just do it because I said so. But the story plays differently if he says, should I take the children's food and throw it to the dogs? Which is how you have been raised to believe if you grew up in that time and place. You are special. You are set apart. You are God's chosen people. So somebody's got to acknowledge the fact that that change happens without it just being an edict from above. And Jesus says, no, there was that day that I was challenged by that woman. And because there is no limitation, there is no shortage on grace. God's grace is abundant and limitless. We will extend the grace now to the larger population. And I don't think that there is Paul, and I don't think that there is Silas, and I don't think that there's Barnabas, and I don't think there's the First Jerusalem Council, and I don't think there's all the things that we talked about in the Paul's missionary journey series back in January. I don't think any of that happens without this story showing that Jesus had that turning point moment. And so I think it's more than an essay question. I really think it's about a value. I think it's about a perspective on life. I think it's about that kind of thing where are we afraid of difference, or do we look to be enlightened by it? Do we find opportunities to engage with others, particularly those who think and feel and believe differently, or are we threatened by that? Are we willing to go out and to say that all of us are woven into this larger tapestry of humanity, or is this more about just circling the wagons? And as I think about the world today and the times that we live in, I think about the devastation we all heard about in Myanmar and Thailand, and I think that we hurt, or we should respond in some way, because stories like this remind us that God's heart breaks for them too. And that because we are common siblings in humanity, that their story should matter to us and ours to them. I think it's a part of reminding that we continue to ask questions, that we continue to grow, that we learn from each other, and that it's okay for us to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and change our perspective on things and maybe go against some of the things that we've always taken and assumed as the truth all along when we are presented with new evidence. And I think most of all, it's an example of Jesus showing us the change of heart and the change of life that can happen when we vulnerably enter into a relationship with somebody else and we hear things from their side. We understand them and we embrace what it means to be a beautiful, global, diverse group of people who are united in our common aim of serving and following in the examples and even the learnings of Jesus Christ. Will you pray with me?